Thank you. Everybody please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. Thank you. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Doherty?
Here.
Mr. Hoey?
Here.
Mr. Lay? Ms. Martin?
Here.
Mr. Nutter? Mayor Samaras?
Here.
Mr. Dakota?
Here.
7 present.
All right, thank you. Tonight, first under special order of business, the presentation of the superintendent's finalists recommended by the Blue Ribbon Committee. I'd like to turn this over to the chair, Connie Martin.
Thank you very much, Ms. Samaras. So as I know this committee, and I hope our viewing audience as well knows, there was a Blue Ribbon Screening Committee that was commissioned by the Lowell School Committee to do the preliminary review of applicants for the superintendency position here for the district. There were 20 individuals who served on that subcommittee. I have to say they did extraordinary work. We spent basically a full little more than over a week's worth of time every evening, starting with reviewing all the applicants. As I said, we had 23 applicants for the position, a very strong pool of candidates, which was really encouraging. The Blue Ribbon Screening Committee had narrowed that down to 10 that we did interviews with. Again, the full committee asking questions, kind of going through the whole process together. At the conclusion of that, the Blue Ribbon Screening Committee had come up with 3 finalists that they want to recommend to the Lowell School Committee to be considered for this position. I have for the committee tonight a copy of the public minutes that the school committee will have to approve. I can kind of maybe pass those out as we talk. There you go. You're the best. Thank you very much, Jerry. And that's basically just the listing of the questions and kind of the, gives a reporting of what happened during the process with the Blue Ribbon Screening Committee. I also have to be distributed tonight publicly for the first time our 3 finalists who the Blue Ribbon Screening Committee is recommending to be considered. So our first finalist, see, here's the challenge. The first finalist is Dr. Sergio Paez. Our second finalist is Dr. Stacy Scott. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time reading this. And then our third finalist is, thank you, Dr. Joel Boyd. Thank you very much, Dominic. I do have copies of all the application packets for all 3 of our finalists. All have been contacted and are very enthusiastic about moving forward in this process, so that's certainly encouraging as well. Again, I say to my colleagues, as you have an opportunity to look at the applications, I think you'll be very impressed with the credentials and the previous experience that they all bring to this potential position. What I would like to have the committee tonight discuss is our opportunities for interviewing. Some of you, I'm sure we've seen the request to set aside May 18th, which is a Saturday. The thought would be if we could do all 3 finalist interviews on that Saturday, we could get through it in one fell swoop, which I think would be helpful. I'd also recommend that if we could include in the listing, say that we would do our interviews and at least give us the opportunity to do a selection that night. We may or may not be prepared, or that afternoon, I guess. We may or may not be prepared to make that selection. Some committee members may want to have some time, and then we can schedule that selection vote for the next week if that's necessary. But at least if we put it on the agenda, we'd have the option to take that vote immediately. We will be working with Glenn Kuchar, who is our representative from the Mass Association of School Committees, who's helped us in this process. really kind of administering it, which has been a huge help. But we'll also be able to rely on him to schedule site visits for any members of the school committee who would like to. We'll be communicating out some details about that. I certainly recommend it. I've done it for every school committee and every superintendent candidate that this committee has considered. I find them incredibly useful to get an opportunity to see where the candidate is coming from, get a chance to talk with their, the school committee members and the staff that they work with on a day-to-day basis. I find them to be really, really helpful. So we'll start that process really right away of trying to schedule those so that we can arrange some field trips. Again, I can't stress enough how professionally and how committed all the members of the Blue Ribbon Screening Committee were. They just did an extraordinary job. And I think that they were really certainly very committed to this process and ensuring that our next superintendent is of the absolute highest caliber to come in and lead our district. And I think that their commitment and the time and effort that they put into this and the thoughtfulness they put into it in terms of our conversations and in terms of the questions for the candidates really, I think, bodes incredibly well for our having a really solid group of finalists to select from.
Thank you for that. First, I think we should ask the superintendent if she could develop a letter of thank you to all of the members of the Blue Ribbon Committee to be sent in behalf of the Lowell School Committee for their service. And, that motion to...
I'd like to just add to
Yes,
that. I think we should send a letter to all the people that applied too, just to
Absolutely.
thank them for applying.
Yes, absolutely. You're correct.
If I,
Oh, okay, great.
to all the applicants, thanking them for their interest,
Thank you.
so they should have all received them
All
already.
right, a question. I have graduation for the university on the 18th. Is there a possibility of Friday night doing it, or is that out? Was that not discussed? For 3?
I don't know what time the graduation is at.
Graduation, there's 2, but I could, doing the first one in the morning, it would
Okay.
finish by 12:30.
Well, if we wanted to, we could certainly, if we scheduled it for 1 PM,
Yeah.
and then we could, I think we'd want to give it like an hour and 15 minutes for each candidate. I mean, that would get us out by, 6 or 7 at the latest, even if we're,
Not mine.
what I'd probably recommend is if we could maybe ask the superintendent's office to poll, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
So we can do that in the next couple days if my colleagues are amenable to
Me,
it.
the later the better. Yes, Ms.
I guess if we're looking at the option of splitting it between doing some on Friday or one on Friday and the other 2 on Saturday, I would prefer to do them all on Saturday, even if we start at 1. We could do 1, the next one at 3, the next one at, 5 or 5, something like that.
How much time do you feel that we,
Well, you want to give time between each interview, so if you say an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half for each interview, and then half hour, the next interview starts. Do you think you could be here by 1?
yes. Past practice, does anybody have a history of past practice on the interviews? Yeah. No.
Connie would.
No, I was just looking, it's probably 50 to 60 minutes, most per candidate. We could do it in an hour and a half if you wanted to.
The screening committee, we did about an hour and 15 minutes, correct? Right.
Well, that's something I think we can discuss.
We could fit 3 in on a Saturday afternoon, though.
I don't see why we couldn't do that. There's no question
Yeah, I
about
think that would be adequate.
it. We want to do this as quickly as possible. And in regard to school committee members attending or going to the sites to review, will we have all the members contact the superintendent's office?
What I
and
think
have
might
the
be
information?
easiest is if we have if we ask Mr. Kuchar to kind of speak with the candidates and have them come up with their available dates, and then every member of the committee will be informed so that we can all, if we can attend, great. It's just going to be too many schedules to try to juggle. So I think if we have the candidates kind of figure out the time that's best for them because they're going to need to pull together between, 10 and 12 people to be available to speak with us. So I think if we let them set up that time, probably for maybe even next week, into the week after that, then we'll inform all school committee members, and then we can coordinate amongst ourselves getting out there.
No, I understand it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure that we have a plan.
That would be the plan I'd submit for approval.
Okay. Any questions? School Committee
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I kind of read Ms. Sheehan's lips a second ago when you talk about past practice. Does that mean school committee, we all have our own questions for each candidate, or one, or?
The thing is, every one of us are going to have a certain amount of questions, but the thing is, I think we should have some kind of meeting to discuss, excuse me, Ms. Martin, School Committee Person Lay has asked the question. I mean, we should actually have some type of discussion as to how we want to run the meeting, okay, and how we as school committee people want to ask the questions, how many questions would be asked, and what we would expect of them, for themselves to make a presentation and a final statement, things like that.
Well, I think, so is it a question about how we've done it before? Okay. Generally, and we mirrored this with the Blue Ribbon Committee as well, we've given candidates basically a 5-minute introduction so they can kind of present to all of the committee their background and explain their interest, why they applied, why they're interested in the position. And then we've never structured the questions. We've kind of started at the beginning and gone kind of round robin. In some cases, we
Do we
have
prepared questions?
with each school committee member and the mayor being able to ask their questions, and just kind of, we're all able to kind of come up with what we want to ask. There hasn't been any, we haven't planned it in advance. And generally, depending on how long the answers take, we'll have an opportunity to ask maybe 2 or 3 questions each over the course of the hour and 15 minutes.
Is the plan, we've had, on the city side, where the counselor or school committee person has, we'll say, 5 minutes or 10 minutes to ask a series of questions, or do you do one question at a time?
We've done one question at a time. Again, I defer to the committee, depending on, how we feel. Either way, I think is fine.
Mr.
If I could just add, as a member of the screening committee, we had 20 people in the room, and an hour and 15 minutes for each candidate. And what we did was we went one at a time. You might have a couple of questions. You just pick what's your most pressing question, and you ask when it was your turn. And then as the progressed, you could hear, what other people had asked before you. So if we got one budget question from somebody else, you might not ask your budget question, you'd ask your second question. But you just go in turn, and then as the time goes by, you might have a chance to ask another one. Sometimes, Ms. Martin would say, we've got time for 2 or 3 more questions. Does anybody have an additional question? In our case, I think we would just go in order until we ran out of time.
But I just want you to think that in terms of, if you were given, say, 10 minutes to ask questions, you can ask the question, and sometimes, rather than asking the second question, what's important is a follow-up question to the first question. And the thing is, it just gives you, I'm just telling, at this point, we should think of the best way we want to approach this. Mr. Hoey?
I've never been on a committee like this before, but we had 20 members, and if we try to duplicate what we did with this 20-person committee, I think would be awesome. I didn't think it was going to turn out great with 20 people, but it turned out super. And I think Mr. Kuchar and Connie should definitely they're going to get my attaboy for what they've done. And I just like what we did when we first got together. We all kind of went over what questions we all wanted to ask, and they went through the questions, and then we had them sitting right in front of us, 3 or 4 different questions on a particular topic. So we probably should just do what we did on that committee, but it's going to be a smaller number now. We might have a harder time with the 7 people than we did with 20. But I was really fascinated by it, and I thought they'd done a great job, both of them. And we did work long hours, because I go in at night at 11 o'clock, so I was leaving at about 9:45. I had to run out the door. But they fed us well. We had a lot of good snacks, and Connie took good care of us, and here we are. And I'm very happy at what went down. Thank you.
This is an important time in the life of the school committee. I just want to make sure everybody is apprised of different ways we can approach this, and we just want to do it the best way possible. But the issue is of, what I want to make sure that it was clear that all candidates would be given 5 minutes, to introduce themselves. All candidates would be allowed to make a closing statement. And as far as what you're stating is that each school committee member can have their own questions. Are you talking about the same questions for every candidate? Are we talking questions that you feel would meet the candidate's background?
They don't necessarily have to be the same questions. If there are particular questions that a school committee has that are specific to a candidate, or there may be something specific in their background, you can change your questions up from candidate to candidate. There's no requirement that you ask the same question to this, of every candidate. So I think each member has the opportunity to kind of fine tune what they want to ask of each particular candidate. Again, I suspect that there will be some overarching themes that we will all kind of, determine are our particular area of focus. But I do think it was, as Ms. Doherty has mentioned, it was helpful to be able to almost kind of riff off some of the previous answers, so that you were able to kind of, if an answer was already given that you didn't, so it wasn't necessary to ask your question, you could ask something slightly different. Or if there's something, again, particular in a candidate's background that you want to hear more about, a committee member can ask it, regardless of what they've asked the other candidates.
I just want to make sure everybody's aware, because
Yep, no,
there are two
absolutely.
approaches where you have specific questions, because there's a base fairness in the sense of if you're asking the same questions, but the issue is most times, most candidates have such a unique background that you want to get into where they're coming from.
Thank you, Your Honor. Through you, I actually have a question that I'm hoping Mr. Kuchar can answer for me. So I took copious notes during the interviews. I actually have transcripts of the finalists' answers to our questions. And so I'm thinking in terms of my questions with this committee, I might be more focused on their individual backgrounds more than the general questions we asked. And my question for Mr. Kuchar, through you, for Mr. Kuchar, is how would be the best, am I able to share those transcripts of the 3 interviews with the 3 finalists with my colleagues who were not able to be present for those interviews, just as another piece of information, just what they said to our questions? And I don't know if you guys
I
are
have a
interested in
question.
that.
I don't see the need for that. I mean, that's your opinion versus,
No, they're transcripts of what they said.
transcripts, I'm sorry.
I just typed what they said.
Mr. Kuchar? Yeah.
I was discussing.
The issue is this is a confidential meeting, and I don't see the value of this at this point. I mean, they're here, they're candidates, they're now being interviewed by us, so.
Okay.
What happened in the past, to me, I don't think, unless you felt it was something that came out that was,
No, I just thought it was more information about the
Mr. Kuchar.
candidates.
I'm advised that that's a question that may require a little more study, and I'd like to pose that to both my general counsel and your general counsel to get some feedback from them.
but in other interview processes that you've done, is that a normal process to give the notes from?
Well, if there are notes related to candidates whose names are now public, that would be a different issue from those candidates. The candidates whose names are not being moved forward, those transcripts should remain private. But for those who are
Question about
public,
that.
they no longer have the same expectation of confidentiality, but they may not have anticipated that their answers might have been public, and they might have addressed those questions in certain ways that might not be appropriate. So I'd like to just check this.
I think it's problematic, my own opinion, but I'd like the opinion,
I'd like to
if
check
that's
it.
what you're looking for. Okay. Mr. Lay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question on the number of candidates that the finalists that we come up with. We have 3. Somehow I kind of expected more, and I just wonder why there's a drop off. Why do we have only 3 instead of more? So, and
I think
how?
it's
I
the level,
can't-
it's the level one, it's,
It was a very specific conversation that we did have as part of the Blue Ribbon Group. And it was, I think, a very strong commitment on the part of the committee to want to recommend only those, the strongest, most, compelling candidates as possible to move forward. We used a variety of different kind of voting mechanisms. And I think it's very, I'll defer to my colleagues if they'd like to comment as well. But I think it was very clear kind of where the line was as to those who the committee felt were incredibly strong, compelling candidacies, and then kind of the ones who were, again, very strong candidates, but just did not rise to that top level. So as the committee was having its conversations, the committee, I think, was very clear in their desire to only put forward those individuals that they felt really represented the strongest opportunities for the superintendency for our district.
is that, yes, Mr. Lay.
As you have seen, one candidate already fell off of the 4. So what happened if all 3? I'm just saying in the scenario if all 3 decided to.
But that's,
So-
no, that's, if I can interrupt.
Yep.
That's another discussion, because these are the candidates that were presented to us. The one thing I don't want to see us doing is, okay, let's go down and dig into the hole and try to find somebody. Then we might have to talk about reposting the position or something like that. But we've had a team that's worked very well together to give us the best possible candidates, and I think that's the direction we have to stay in. It's not reaching down and saying, what's left? That's not going to help the Lowell school system. Another question, though, Ms. Martin, did you have?
Just wanted to reiterate to your point, Mayor Samaras, that at this point, having gone with the 3 finalists that we're moving forward with, they have all agreed to move forward. They have all gone through this interview process with the Blue Ribbon Screening Committee, been told that they were invited to move forward as a finalist, and all 3 of these candidates have accepted and are very enthusiastic about moving forward in this process to meet with the full school committee and compete for the position.
All right, did you have a rating sheet? Did each member of the Blue Ribbon Committee have a rating sheet for the candidates?
We did use a ballot. Those ballots, it's my understanding, are still protected under executive session, so they won't get released. But we did.
I'm not asking for that.
Yeah. We did use a balloting system so that we could place our candidates in the tiers we felt were appropriate.
Any further discussion? All right, I need a motion to accept this as a report of progress by Mr. Dakota, seconded by Mr. Hoey. Thank you. Next, we have the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2020 budget. Madam Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We present to you tonight an overview of the FY20 proposed budget. And we thought it was really important to share with you the premise around the planning of this document with our students and our vision at the center of the planning, and going back and reflecting on what we have been able to accomplish this year as a team, as a district, and also bring forward. So we grounded our work in the pillars of our strategic plan. Excellent, pillar 1, excellent teaching and learning everywhere. And we really looked at a model for transforming teacher practice. And so when, I know this is small, but you have on the left-hand side of your budget binder, you have the presentation there for you, so it might be easier for you to see that information. But we looked at really the data and what we needed to consider. And we've utilized the human resource audit, the coordinated program review findings, our district self-assessment that we conducted as part of our comprehensive district review, and curriculum review that is going to be beginning very soon. We're going to be reviewing the Eureka math implementation in the district. So we thought it was important to share with you. In addition, we did some looking at our school improvement plans, and we made a decision as a leadership team to create all of our school improvement plans as turnaround plans, because we felt the value of the leadership teams in the schools that are working on these plans. And so we're focusing on all of the turnaround practices. And we're also believe that evaluation is key. And that has been the focus for the last couple of years and will continue to be some of the work that we'll do next year with our leadership, and trying to really focus on helping leaders to provide good, solid feedback and consistent feedback. So in addition, we felt it's really important that we ground our teachers in research-based practices, curriculum that we use, and the PD that we use. So in addition to really learning in Lowell. And across the board, we're building on the Teachers Academy. You'll hear more about that. We've done a lot of work which will also go into next year and will be shared with the next superintendent. We believe in the collaborative process, and we believe that that work makes a difference for schools, so that the leader needs to engage their teachers. So you'll see all of the different teams that we've been working on. For Pillar 2, this is students learning in a respectful and joyful community that attends to the whole child. And you can see that some of the things that we focused on this year was our safety planning. And based on our audit that we had, we were able to get Crisis Go, the app. We'll be training our leaders in this in June. We've had a test pilot, and it's been people are pretty amazed with the ability. And then social emotional learning, we have launched a social emotional learning team that has worked with the Excel Network and Rennie Center. They'll be continuing that work. We have selected as our framework, the CASTLE framework for social emotional learning, and the next step would be to look at how we embed this into all of our classes throughout the district. In addition, when we focus on the whole child, we've had a much professional development this year that's focused on the whole child. Some of the work has continued with PBIS, with Michelle Borber and Ending Peer Cruelty, district-wide training for all staff on building student empathy. And we're piloting the PlayWorks work in one of our schools, Robinson School. We did submit as part of their plan to have that as part of their plan. Student programs, we have an amazing 21st century after-school program, as well as you'll hear a little bit more about that in the summer program updates that will be provided this evening. As well as we just received a summer nutrition program grant that you'll hear a little more about, and special ed summer school programming. Pillar 3, student learning from a highly qualified, expert, and diverse workforce. So when we look at these pieces, although we, our budget was quite lean this year, and we didn't have, the HR staff that we really needed, but we still tried to focus on maintaining highly qualified staff. Right now, we have a total of 1,053 teachers. 98.3% of them are considered certified, and through DESE, and that's, we want to be 100%, but we're higher than the state average, and we're pretty pleased with that. And those people that are here on waivers are also being held accountable to getting that certification. Diverse work staff, you'll be hearing, I'm not going to steal your thunder, you'll be hearing about a really exciting grant that, with the work of the Teacher Academy and our curriculum department, we received, we just got notification, it's a teacher diversification grant to support paraprofessional advancement. So we're very, very excited about that, and we believe that we have a very diverse para pool, and that work is started already. Educational pathway in collaboration with UML to support our students in becoming teachers as well and becoming educators. So that's another piece that we launched this year. And also, I think you heard last time about the literacy MTEL preparation course. The recruitment piece, we've been struggling with that, but we have used, with your support, some outside recruiters, and that has seemed to serve the district well. We have made sure that we're not only using the in-house tool for publicizing, we're using SchoolStream and SchoolSpring to get candidates to come in. We're using our HR recommendations. We wish we could use all of them, but budget-wise, that's going to be a bit challenging. So in addition, our Pillar 4, our Every Student Educates Parents, the Community, and Partners. That we are engaging our families. So, and I apologize, when we were developing this, the wheel kept getting bigger and bigger. So I will make sure that you get a copy that you can actually read, but you'll see all the different supports that we have in place and some of the partners that are key to us having successful parent engagement. Last night I attended the citywide Family Council, and they're not in extremely large, so this is my my shout out to all our families to please become involved and get engaged, because it's an amazing group of individuals who are really thinking deeply about education in the Lowell Public Schools. Pillar 5, all schools have adequate, equitable, and safe facilities and resources. And I do have to say that I believe the city has been very cooperative in working with us this year around facility issues with roofing and, you know, heating issues, and really being attentive to the calls that I receive on a daily basis. I get notification right away, so we've really worked and developed a good relationship in that front. Together, also, the Lowell High School project for the building has continued, and we had a visit from the state, which you'll be hearing a little bit more about, for the accelerated repair programs. So we're very excited. We're hopeful that the visits were fruitful, and we'll be learning more, and you'll see some of that tonight unfold. So infrastructure-wise, we've this year had worked with the city on an integrated phone system, repaired updated intercom systems. For next year, we're going to be, through the COPS grant, be able to, and we're working on getting that in place right now, the RFPs for door lock upgrades and keyless entry for our schools. So we're excited that although it's not everything that we feel that our schools need safety-wise, that there are some real good progress that has been made. And then for next year also, we know that we've had to slash the budget back this past year, but we need to really focus on email service system upgrades district-wide, because we're really struggling with that. And then resources and materials, this year as well, copiers, we've got a plan, we've had people in visiting on that. Our classroom library collections have been advanced, materials and furniture, and everything is being allocated for our expansion at the STEM and the bridge programs. So that just gives you some of the focus that helped to drive us this year, and continues to be embedded in the proposals that we'll be presenting to you tonight. So at this time, I turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Turner to share with you a bit of the budget overview.
The Lowell Public Schools has two funding sources, the general fund and the grant funds. The general fund is funded through Chapter 70 in direct contribution from the city. In our community, our aid actually dictates our spending. We don't build a budget and then go and request the funds from the source. The first slide, the Chapter 70 summary, this actually shows the Chapter 70 in direct contributions from the city that are calculated by the state. The Chapter 70 summary is what the expectation of minimum spending is, again, from the state. They use the city's ability to pay to determine how much the city's going to fund, and then they take the total budget that they determine with the foundation budget, less the amount they feel the city can afford, and that's the amount they give us in Chapter 70, which is more or less financial aid. The state determines this minimum spending for our district using the next slide, which is the foundation budget. This foundation budget, although you cannot see it, it's in your packet. It's actually many columns that show how many students are enrolled by grade level and other demographics such as economically disadvantaged students, special ed students, ELL students. This is then summarized in, the funds. $12,735 is the estimated amount per student that we'll receive this year. Of the state-determined minimum spending, the state determined that the city's ability to pay was 24% and that they will pay 26%. Of this $208 million foundation budget that the city determines we will get, they estimated that they will fund $158 million of that, and the city should fund $49 million. Of the $49 million, 33% is given to us as direct aid, and 67% of that is given to us in-kind costs such as City Hall department charge-offs, snow removal, and other such costs that are listed on the maintenance of effort agreement. What this means is that I'll explain it like this. With the Chapter 70 summary that's on, that you can see up there, we're going to get $9 million more in Chapter 70 this year. That sounds extremely generous, but unfortunately, that's not enough to keep up with all of the raises, the health insurance increases, and transportation cost increases. So we're getting $9 million more in Chapter 70. The city contribution, if you go back one slide, the previous slide actually shows that the state increased the required minimum for the city by $2.2 million. So that people understand, even when they increase the $2.2 million, the city gets to decide whether they're going to give that to us in cash or in in-kind contributions. So of the $2.2 million increase that the city is required to give us, they've agreed to give us 3.96% of that, which is $623,000. The rest will be in additional charge-offs. So again, they'll continue to give us 33% of the 24% they're expected to pay. The calculations that are based on the foundation budget calculation, these calculations that are based on the foundation budget calculations that the state provides, again, they're by grade level and demographics such as the economically disadvantaged, special ed, and ELL. If the state is funding us based on these criteria, then we should make sure that we do the same. So what we did when we started the budget process is we met with each of the principals. When we met with each of the principals to identify what their rosters were and confirm and make sure there weren't people missing or things like that, we started to hear all these stories about how some gave up a reading teacher to keep their math teacher and all of these type of things. With the limited amount of resources that we have, how do we honor one and not the other? How do we decide which ones to honor? So what we did for the budget process this year is to concentrate on developing something called a position control. So this position control, which is in my narrative and a whole tab full of position controls by school, I met with each school and identified what standard elementary school should have. I identified what a standard middle school should have. So in your tab, I think, oh, it's right there. Okay, so this example is the elementary. So what again, if we identify what the base is, I'm able to see visually now who has what. One school, none of our schools have everything that they need. So if one school comes to us and honestly says, we need more, they're right. But with limited resources, how do I give that to them when there's a school that has double the amount of those students? So if we have an ELL population, if one school has only 2 teachers and they think they need more, but they actually have half the amount of students as a school that only has 1. So this is a nice systematic way of allowing you, when people call you, when we have to make cuts, if a school calls you and says, well, they're cutting our ELL teacher, you'd be able to look at these and understand why. It's transparent and it's very fair. So this first screen that you see is the staffing model for an elementary school. What you'd learn on a 4-strand elementary school is that you'll have 4 classroom teachers by grade level. So you're going to have 4 first graders, 4 first grade teachers, 4 second grade teachers, 4 third, et cetera. It also would taught us that you have 1 para for each preschool or kindergarten class. So up there, you see the little blue arrows. That tells me that anytime I see a preschool teacher, I know they automatically get a preschool para. Anytime I see a kindergarten teacher, I automatically give them a kindergarten para. The other grade levels, there's 1 floating para per grade level. That's your standard classroom. On the right-hand side is your programs, your adjustment programs, your CSA programs, your special ed programs, and CSA adjustment, things like that. You automatically, the schools get 1 special ed teacher per grade level for 1 through 4. So they typically get 4 special ed teachers. If they get to a trigger point where their special ed caseloads are high, they could go up to 5. So whenever I see a deviation from the standard model, like if you look at your tab and you start to look through the schools, you'll see a you might see a red box under special ed teachers. That means that I have to research whether they met the trigger point for getting a 5th special ed teacher. One thing that this would show too is that for every CSA teacher, there's 3 CSA paras. As I went through this process, I started to see, wow, there's 3 CSA teachers, I should have 9 CSA paras. Why then do I have 11 at one particular school? So then that would make me question it. And then if they told me, if I found out that there was a one-on-one para there, then I need the name of the student, because sometimes the one-on-one students may have already gone on to middle school, but the paras remain behind because they're part of that model. This will allow us to let the staff follow the students the way that the government does. If they're giving us funding based upon their acknowledgement that we need more for poverty, if we have poor students, or if we have bilingual students that need translating and other services, then the money should follow those students. The next thing on here, let's see, I did the 3 paras. Oh, and by the way, the elementary schools typically have 4 allied arts. They can pick and choose from that list, but they typically have 4 allied arts. They also have 1 math resource teacher and 1 literacy specialist. One thing that this process also did is it allowed me to understand that each of these schools would identify the same position in different ways. This allowed me to not think one school has 3 math teachers. Maybe one was an actual 5th grade teacher, whereas the other math teacher might have been in allied arts. By doing this model, I'm able to equitably see which ones really had more. So this middle school model, this is, there's a lot of notes on your paper, but you'll see that, again, you'll have 1 teacher per grade level per strand. For instance, if there's a 6-strand school, you're going to have 6 5th grade teachers, 6 6th grade. In the past, we would identify a 5th grade teacher as math science, English social studies, but unfortunately, you can't code them both ways in the system, so the MUNIS system would have them coded as math, the budget could have them coded as science. It was just very confusing, so we call them elementary and middle. 1 teacher per grade level, you'll have 1 float and para per grade level, you'll have additional paras based on high needs such as poverty, ELL, or SPED numbers. You'll have at least 1 ELL teacher plus more based on your ELL enrollment. You'll have 4 to 5 special education teachers based on caseloads at the school. you'll have 3 paras for each CSA classroom. You may have 1 para for each adjustment or LEAP classroom. You may have more if we're going to define it by each school. We're going to monitor this as an internal control. If there's a large student, when boys get to that age where they're bigger than the teachers, and there's a need for additional support, then we can justify that and put that on there. We have 8 allied art teachers in the middle school model, and we also offer 2 loop-in teachers to assist with content instruction in 7th and 8th grade. We also have a math resource teacher and an instructional specialist. Again, by doing this, I was able to put a uniform title for each of these positions so that we're comparing apples to apples, but also understanding why and what they have. For instance, this math resource teacher that I just referred to is actually a coach, but they just happen to fall into the teacher union, but they're a coach. They're providing support. They're teachers for the teachers. So thanks to the assistant superintendent and the special ed director, I learned a lot about what goes into each school. So that was what I spent a lot of my time doing. I also did, the high school is one of a kind, it's huge. I did do a position control, by the way, that's tab 2. Tab 2 will show you how much, this went back and forth, principals would argue and yell at me, and, and some of these position controls showed me that the ones that are good advocators, because I would have been the good advocator too, so I don't blame the advocators, but those that can advocate tend to have a lot of extras, so you'll see reds, and then those that are more quiet have more yellows, which mean we should look into adding something there. But this does not mean cut. When you look through the position controls and you see red, it does not mean that we're looking to cut that position. It just means that we need to investigate the numbers and make sure that the enrollment for ELL, special ed, or economically disadvantaged warrant those extra support positions. In your narrative, the assistant superintendent of curriculum gave me 2 tables that I included in here so that you can see what we're using as a reference point. The first table is one where they took the total enrollment by school and then your ELL enrollment, and then the percent of those students that have scored below a 3 on their test. This is really helpful because one school may think they have 50 ELL students and they think that's very high, not understanding that there's another school that has 51% of their entire school is ELL. And then not only are they ELL, but they might have scored very low on their testing and need additional supports. So that first table that you'd see in the narrative was provided from the curriculum office. The second one was also provided from the curriculum office, which is showing the total school enrollment and the percent of those students that are economically disadvantaged. It tells you the number of students and the percent. Because again, if we have a school, and I'll use an example, if we have the Stocklosa, and if they have a very high ELL population and a very high poverty population, then we are justified with giving them additional supports because they have additional needs. I did have a chart that took this data and sorted so that you could see which schools had the highest ELL, which schools had the highest poverty, and which schools had the highest sped caseloads. Unfortunately, I didn't put it in here. It jammed on me, so I will bring that at the next budget meeting. Let's see, so that's the position control. Again, you can find that in tab 2. Other than that, what I wanted to share with you is the budget binder, just so that you can understand it as you're going through it. The budget binder has a narrative that explains the funding, a recap of what I just told you about the foundation budget, and it explains the position control, and it gives you the model. So the second tab, which shows the actual position controls and rosters by school, the narrative will show you my models. I developed a model. So again, the position controls are going to show what the must-haves are in the data tables. It also shows, I'm sorry, the unit, oops, sorry. The other thing that we did with the position control is that we made it reflect the end of the year report. So when you develop a budget, you go and you spend all your money, but at the end of the year, we have to report how much we spent in each category, and the government then decides whether we met net school spending and what we're spending our money on. It's accountability. So if we're not coding it to match this report, then it's very difficult at the end of the year. So we made it very uniform. Okay, so I already explained all of the position controls. And now, in the binder, so you have your narrative, you have your position controls, you have the actual budget is in tab 1. The overall budget, as you know, last year it was very detailed, and the budget should be built so that the audience understands it. It was very good for someone like me to see the offsets and the grants, but I went back to the old school way of having the one column with the different funding sources so it doesn't get confusing. After all, we don't know our grant allocations until June. So we don't know the allocations until after the fact, so I couldn't accurately add that in a column. So what I can tell you is that our overall budget was $188 million, well, more toward $189 million. $9 million of this is coming from Chapter 70. 16.5 million is coming from the city's cash, which is all, this is all summarized right here. And grants and offsets have decreased by 3.2 million. And the reason they decreased is when we did the day school, having the students stay in district, we're no longer going to get circuit breaker reimbursements for those students. So the $4 million that we did get will decrease drastically. So we had $5.7 million in offsets this current year. We're estimating $4 million for this, for FY20. And again, that includes a reduction to the circuit breaker and a reduction to the food service. We are going to do $1 million food service expenditure transfer still. We get $1.6 million in profit, if you want to use that as like a holdback. We're going to leave the $600,000 as the amount that we pay back over the 4 years. So that's the reduction in offsets. The reduction in grants, the grants, we had $9 million, $9.9 million last year. We have 8.4, I'm estimating 8.4 this year, because rather than finding ourselves in the situation we have faced in the past, I've looked at the historical amount of what we projected and what we actually brought in. So first, of the $9.9 million in grants, I reduced it by $1.1 million, which was the hurricane relief. There's no guarantee we're getting that again, so I reduced it by that. And then of the remaining amount, I estimated that we'd get 95% of that, because there's been talk of cuts to Title III and different titles, so I just wanted to be safe. So I budgeted that at 95% as well. Any questions so far? Yeah, yes.
Mr. Lay, if you have a question, address it to the,
It-
if you have a question.
Did you have a question? And
Yes, Ms. Doherty?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the budget that you're presenting to us when you talk about the position control. Have you already done that step of looking at the demographics in those schools that are entitled to above the standard of position control? Or is that something that's coming after?
yes, as a matter of fact, if you, the second tab, the position controls that you see in there, you'll see a lot of them that have regs. You'll see a lot.
Just for
Go ahead.
clarification, when you're saying tab 1, tab 2, I'm not seeing tabs that say number 1, 2.
Sorry.
I see a tab that says position
That
control
one.
and a tab that says staff salary book, but there are no tabs that are numbered 1, 2, so,
Okay.
okay,
yes.
so
So
just
position control,
control, position control tab?
yes. I'm looking at my workbook, so I'm sorry, I'm referring to what it is in there. Yes, so the position control tab will show all of the schools, and we've already identified where the areas are. And we've also added the ones that were justified with their trigger points. Now, the last part of this process would be to measure it, right? So if all of them have a need for an additional ELL student, which one needs it most? We will use the data and let the data drive the decisions. So that has not been done yet. But even when that type of stuff happens, if we have if we have one school that didn't need that, they had an extra special ed teacher, but another school needs it, that type of stuff would play out. But we would want to have conversations with the principals before making any of those decisions. And we also want to make sure that the enrollment that we're expecting for next year matches the data that we currently have, so that we're not moving a special ed teacher out and find that we end up having even more special ed teachers at that school next year. So,
Can I follow up on that? So if you're finding, let's use the ELL example, that we have schools that have a high number of ELL students and don't have the appropriate staffing, and we need to add staff, is that built into this budget already?
It
the
is.
cost?
not extras, it's still built into this budget because we already have seen that there were extras at other schools. So we're moving.
So it's almost like you're trading it. You're saying,
Okay.
you have more ELL teachers than you need, this school doesn't have what they
Absolutely.
need.
So we're redistributing, we have no choice. We have no choice if we are limited.
Sure, that's going to be really popular.
It's not going to be, but that's the problem. We're not doing this by choice. We're doing it because if we only have 4 slices to a pie, we have to share that now. We have to find a new way to prorate that where it's fair. So we're not doing this to hurt anyone. We recognize that none of the schools have everything that they deserve or everything that they should have. But what we want to do is when they do get angry, we want to be able to be as transparent as possible and show them why we're doing it. If I say to one principal who's going to lose something and it doesn't work for their schedule or it causes inconveniences, if I show them that they only have 20% special ed case, a 20% caseload for special ed, and another school has 75%, then it goes without saying, no matter how frustrated they are, it's justified. It also helps us with you, because we understand that you can get calls from the parents, and I was one of those parents, so I would definitely have done my part. But if you have parents, if you have teachers, if you have principals, whoever calls you and, is upset that they're losing a certain 4 paras, let's say. Well, if on that position control, you see that everyone else has 1 per grade level, but that particular school has 2 per grade level, even though they have half the amount of high-need students, who could say, no one would be able to say that we should still do it, right? It has to be fair. We have to let the dollars follow the kids. The state gives us those extra dollars for those kids, so we have to let it follow. What I'm going to do now, being that this is a big book and I won't go line by line because we have the budget hearings, is I'm going to summarize the overall changes, and then the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum is going to explain some staff movements, some more detailed staff movements. So on this budget change thing, we have, based on school committee approval, the superintendent and chief human resource officer salary ranges were increased. We have reductions to the 1,400 finance and administrative services, which include the assistant business manager, part-time computer repair techs, and database administrators. We have photocopier purchase accounts that were modestly increased due to just daily operational needs. The director of accountability position was eliminated. Merit increases were reduced due to negotiations with 8 different principals. 1 BCBA, 2 evaluation team chairpersons, 1 psychologist were eliminated. These positions will be centrally located and have rotation schedules. Out-of-district tuition, we did increase it by 5%, but we did not build in a buffer. If our budget is extremely tight again this year, we're going to do what we started to do this past year, where I come and I give you data each month, so we'll go through it together. I'm going to develop a standard reporting packet so that the information becomes consistent for you, and again, we'll start to all understand it together, and if we see that we're going to have shortages, then we can make difficult decisions when we encounter it rather than making deeper cuts now. The paraprofessional number was increased to reflect the addition of all the one-to-one paras and all of the additions since the original budget. If you can recall, when I was doing the forensic review, the actual amount of paras paid was, it far exceeded what was in the budget. So I brought that up to where it, to match what we've been paying. The PEG funds of 108, the city did agree to pay that for us, so that's offset in the audio-visual salaries. Instead of on a column, you'll see it in a row as a reduction. The professional development that we had cut slightly to, it was, a grant was able to cover it, we reinstated that. 2 social workers were eliminated. Transportation was increased due to the projections of more students being placed out of district due to the limited space at the 80-day school. And coaches were reduced in some areas to allow for equity with other areas. So we had a task force, and these are the type of things that we're seeing as we go, but it all takes a little bit of time and ironing things out. We found that certain clubs or certain activities of students that require just as many hours and as much participation, say for instance choral and band, may not have been, they literally did not increase year to year as the other groups did. So other groups like teachers with step increases, they would have annual increases. There were certain groups that did not even get an annual increase. So we met as a team, and we've reduced some low participation clubs so that we can make that, help with that area. So you don't see an increase in that line. It's red still, it's highlighted in red, because even though you don't see an increase, we have decreased other clubs so that we can make this fair. And then we also reduced athletic supplies by 10,000 because if we had no choice, and if other areas are getting hit, they had a very large athletic budget, so they did 10,000, which they were very helpful with us too. Nobody wants to see any of these cuts, but we had to balance the budget.
Story.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I totally agree with this whole approach at looking at really equity and basing the money on the needs of our students in our schools. I guess I just have a question to all of you, if you've considered this at all. I know that the research says the earlier we give them the supports, the better. We're still looking at, first grade sharing one para. And was there any thought to maybe taking the fourth grade para and moving so that first grades would have 2 paras instead of 1? Because in some strands, that's 1 para for 4 classrooms, right?
Yes.
So typically, in a school schedule, you would, a building leader would schedule the reading blocks in such a way that the 4th grade para would be free to work in 1st grade when 4th grade is at Allied Arts. So then there are 2 paras or more paras that are available during a 1st grade reading block. So typically in an elementary schedule, that is what they do, is we look to schedule so that reading blocks occur in such a way that you can free up paras who are servicing a grade level that might be at specials to go in and do that support. So oftentimes there are 2 paras available to support a 1st grade classroom while, say, a 4th grade strand is at specials, because the paras don't follow, they're instructional paras. They're not tied necessarily to a student. That would be a different kind of paraprofessional. That would be a one-on-one or something like that. So that's usually what happens in a schedule. And then above and beyond that, if you will see in the position control, if it's a high-needs school with ELS populations or a socioeconomic need, then there are additional paras as well provided to do what you're saying exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to try to take some reassurance from that those 1st grade teachers are getting more para help than it looks like on the books. But I have to tell you from my experience, when my son was a 1st grader, they had a para all day for that one 1st grade teacher. And I see this as a loss that we pay it forward. The kids, the further they get behind. But it does sound like you've got a workaround for that, and you're comfortable with that being good enough.
Well, given the current budget situation, that's what we looked at when we looked at the position control. There's one thing to have equality, right? Everybody has the same thing. We don't even have schools with equality, and then we have to build in the equity, right? So that piece is a real challenge because we know what we want, but we have to work within the budget framework that we have. So that's the work of the position control is really going to help us have in the next couple of weeks conversations. We've already had conversations with the principals around this, but not to be not cutting staff, but to be able to say, okay, this staff member is really needed at a particular school.
We were leaning.
Would want more.
Yeah, we would want more. But with the good news is that we're not done. This is a lot of work. And one thing that we just did a reconciliation, like I wanted to make sure all the current paraprofessionals are in the budget. But as we go through this process, this cleanup and this reconciliation, making sure that the one-to-ones still have a student that's in the district and not long gone, things like that. As we go through the reconciliation process, and we figure these out, we're not going to let the staff go if they're already built into a balanced budget. What we'll do is we will redistribute. So it's like you just said, I like that analogy about a trade-off. It's, yeah, I mean, if we can look at these certain roles as district level rather than school level and move the positions, you know, when the need moves, you know, like for instance, a paraprofessional, if the one-to-one student left, that para, we can use that para somewhere else where there's greater need in in a higher special ed class, let's say.
Yes?
Sorry, one last thing about this. How is that impacted with our contracts? Do we have that kind of flexibility to identify, oh, we've got an extra para at this elementary school where we really need them at this other one? What's entailed in terms of that?
Well, first of all, this is what I meant by when I said we're mapping it all out, but I'm sure that if we worked with the union and made them understand, like, they understand if we have a one-to-one leave, but we don't necessarily mean mid-year anyway, we mean just as the need, we were gonna iron it out. We have other things to do, considerations like build-in seniority, things like that. Would they lose it if they moved? We were going to work with the union to figure that type of stuff out together. We're just, right now, it was just the initial, here's what we learned, here's what we see, just so that we can get a control and an infrastructure, so, a structure to follow.
All right, Mr. Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm kind of assuming that in this redistribution that you would keep in mind, say, for instance, if it's a para who's working at the middle school, that they would stay in a middle school setting? Because I know that just as teachers prefer to be in an elementary setting or in a middle school setting, that's where they would prefer to be all the time. So I think that would have to be another consideration,
Yes.
as well as the need aspect, too.
These are the type of reasons why collaboration with the unions is, it's a must. A couple of the principals, when, Robin, you might be able to explain this one more, but a couple of the principals were asking if they had a one-to-one para leave, so if we're in the 8th grade, they move on to the high school, so that para gets to bump someone in that school, but what if the lowest the lowest person on the totem pole happens to be in the CSA classroom and they don't want to work in that population? So that question, we have to work with the unions on that one too. These are all the things you identify but these are things you face even if you're not doing a position control. These are things you do anyway.
Further questions? No. All right. Madam Superintendent?
Thank you. I just ask Assistant Superintendent Desmond to share with you just a few. You know mostly of these program reconfigurations because we brought them forward to you, but just a quick summary of those for all of you.
So as Assistant Superintendent Turner mentioned, we, together as a team, looked at all of the schools and the position controls to make sure that the funding sources are following our students so that we're providing exactly what we need to. Also in that process, we had to look at some of the things that were already approved here, such as the expansion of the STEM Academy, and what does that mean for our staffing ratios as well. So in this budget also is considered the roll-up of the STEM Academy, which is we're adding 2 7th grade teachers, we're adding 2 8th grade teachers. an allied arts teacher, and a special education teacher. We've also, in the process, looked at the classroom expansion reconfiguration, which is including the new 7th and 8th grade classrooms, which has been discussed previously with the committee. The RFP has been submitted for the additional faculty facility upgrades that are taking place this spring and summer. The allocations for material supplies and furniture, some are financial allocations, some are shared equipment allocations, and then also the pending RFP that will need to go out for the additional expansion for FY21. So all of those things have been taken into consideration. Also, the Sullivan, Moody, and Riley school changes that again were addressed here earlier in the year. We have grade 5 classes from the Moody and the Riley school that are returning to the Sullivan school. And as long as the students are in zone 2 from the Moody, they will go to the Sullivan, and the Riley school students will go to the Sullivan as well. 4th grade students from the Moody and the Riley, again, depending on if they're zone 2 at the Moody, they will transfer to the Sullivan school. The Riley school students will all move up to the Sullivan school from grade 4, and then the Lincoln school students in grade 4 that are in zone 2 will regain the Sullivan grade 5 slots. The expansion of the bridge program, and again, that was something that we spoke about here. We have considered the creation of the grade 6 option at the bridge. We've included 12 additional student openings for grade 6 referrals for our middle schools, making the bridge a grade 6 to 8 program. And so that's all been included in this budget work as well. And with that, the expansion of staffing, which is one science teacher being reassigned to create that extra classroom at the bridge to accommodate for our 6th grade referrals, and the additional caseworker position that's going to be needed to support the additional students that will be attending the bridge. Our CSA Day School will be expanding as well as part of the contract with the organization that provides us that facility. Built in for 2019-20 school year was the addition of 2 classrooms, and we will start out with 1 additional classroom there to be able to provide for the students that the district Director of Special Education, Jennifer McChrystal, is anticipating coming back to our district. And then we will also have that 2nd classroom for any potential students that move back into the district for next school year, during the school year. So that has all been accounted for as well. And as far as staffing, there is 1 CSA teacher that will be added to the CSA Day School, the AD Day School, and then also 3 paraprofessionals, which will be part of the reassignment process. And then through the program restructuring the Riley School, we will be adding the preschool strand, which includes a mainstream preschool and a CSA preschool. So through that restructuring, we will be reassigning a pre-K teacher, a CSA pre-K teacher, and then 3 paraprofessionals for the CSA pre-K classroom and 1 paraprofessional for the mainstream pre-K classroom. And again, those will be all reassigned, and they have been accounted in the budget process for this year. The Robinson School will be replacing one of their math interventionist teachers, that's an allied arts teacher, with a grant that we anticipate receiving for school redesign. We will be able to fund the money necessary to convert that math intervention position into a social worker position, to add a social worker to help with the social emotional needs of our students at the Robinson. We have a career academy. We will be replacing the behavior modification specialist with a social worker to help support with the social emotional needs at the career academy. And then also the Bartlett School during this school year had to add 2 one-on-one nurses, and they have been accounted for in this new budget as well. I will just go quickly to the next slide. This is just a recap of what Assistant Superintendent Turner mentioned while she was speaking a few moments ago. These are some of the positions that were eliminated, as you may recall, in the FY19 budget when we were working to balance that budget throughout this year, and they are not included in the FY20 budget. So they just have remained at a zero for this upcoming budget. And then also not included in the FY20 are the positions that Assistant Superintendent Turner mentioned moments ago. And then the same with the non-personnel reductions. These were changes that were made in the FY19 budget so that we could balance throughout the year. And there have been some reductions and some increases that have had to occur for this FY20 budget. Again, this is a balanced budget that Assistant Superintendent Turner is presenting, and these are just some of the things that have had to occur, and she mentioned them just moments ago. So I think that covers.
All right. Mr. Nutter?
Just a quick question on that previous slide to this one, where it says EL tutors, reduction in days of service, 50,000, and intervention tutors, reductions in days of service, 293,000.
So that is the same as what we just did, this 19 budget, and we're maintaining that number.
So we are maintaining that, right? Okay, thank you.
No staff are being eliminated, it's just a shorter window of time.
Mr. Lay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Assistant Superintendent Turner. You mentioned earlier about the data that you got from principals. Do you think it's okay to share that information with us?
It's in here.
Oh, it's in here? Oh.
It's the
In the-
position control tab.
Okay.
It shows each school, and behind each of these is the actual roster. So not only did I meet with the principals, then I would go into Munis, print out everything from Munis, and when Munis, which is the accounting system, if the payroll system had 20 and a principal only had 17, then we would follow up, and that's why we went back and forth. So it was a very thorough review of staff so that we don't find ourselves with more, which brings me to another point I had wanted to make. As you're going through the budget, you may look and you may find that, for instance, elementary teachers might have had 280 teachers, and you might question, well, why do you only have 260? Please know that that is just recoding things. Like I said, when I came in last year, the budget book might have had someone as an elementary teacher. Munis might have it as a math teacher, because a fifth grade teacher is fifth grade math and science, let's say. But I wanted to point out another overall thing, like on page 7 in the budget, it shows that overall we had 884 teachers on that page. There's now 860, and that's because through the process with the position control, I learned that math resource teachers are really coaches. So that really is something that should go with literacy specialists and not lumped with the teachers. So it was a simple movement of 12 people right there. So it's really just an adjustment and clarifying things. I also wanted to let you know that the overall budget, it looks empty compared to what you saw, but that was because we were committed to making it more simple so it's easier to understand. And I also wanted to say that you're not losing the data. Once the grants start to come in, the grant allocations start to come in, I am going to then show you 2 columns with the budget, and when we have actual grants received, I'll break it into, you'll see social workers and see that the general fund is going to fund 30 and the grant will fund 11. And with that, I want you to know that with the grants, we're trying to have a savings by rewriting the grants without putting teachers and MTRS staff onto the grants. If we do that, if I pay my own MTRS, I pay it. It comes out of my paycheck. But when you put a teacher, or if you put an administrator or a teacher onto a grant, the grant automatically gets charged an additional 9% for MTRS. So not only the government gets the MTRS the employee pays, plus this 9% fee. So if I rewrite the grants and put paras instead of teachers, I'm going to automatically save that MTRS fee, which is a savings of like $300,000 on the title grants alone. So if we're able to find enough eligible costs, we'll be able to save just by rewriting it in a different way. So just wanted to point that out too. That might have an impact on this. We might be able to add more.
Mr. Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know, being a former music teacher, I have a question about the 4 band teachers that are not in the year 20, that they're eliminated. How is that?
So we had 2 forums with the principals, and we wanted their input because we don't really know what they value and what they don't. And it was pretty unanimous that they said they value the program, but they felt as though they needed to restructure the model. The current model was not working. It, for scheduling reasons and different things. So what they suggested and what they prefer is to eliminate this current model and to establish an after-school program using some of the savings. So that was something that when we had to balance the budget on top of using the principal's recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Nutter?
Not so much of a question, just, I just want to say thank you to the team up here. This took a lot of work to gather all this information and present it to us. And I know we're going to have a series of meetings where we'll get into more questions. But the amount of work that went into this, the amount of effort and detail, it's very easy. I skimmed through it a lot while you were doing your presentation. It's very easy to read and to follow. So I just want to thank you all for your time and effort in presenting this to us today.
Madam Superintendent?
It truly was a team effort, and we will continue to work with our principals in the coming weeks around the position control to make sure that we can build a more equitable model for our schools.
Any further questions? I think you need a motion to accept this as a report of progress. Mr. Nutter, second by Mr. Hoey. Thank you. Next, we go into approval. I need a motion to accept and place and file the minutes of the April 10th, 2019 meeting, the Lowell School Committee meeting. I need a motion to accept that. The minutes by Ms. Martin, seconded by Mr. Delay. Thank you. Now we have permission to enter. Madam Superintendent?
Yes, if you have any questions relative to the permission to enter, we can certainly answer those at this time.
Any questions? Mr. Nutter?
Could you just go into a little detail about the busing cost?
Transportation. One, we had to amend the transportation because, oh, sorry. So at the beginning of the year, we didn't have enough money, right? So when we were doing purchase orders, they didn't always do the purchase order for the full amount because of funding issues. So they had to amend it since then to allow for the contract.
Any other questions? I need a motion to approve the permission to enter by Ms. Doherty, seconded by Mr. Dakota. Roll call.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Nutter?
Yes.
Mayor Samaras?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
A basic motion. Motion to cancel the regular scheduled Lowell School Committee meeting of Wednesday, June 5th, 2019, due to Lowell High School graduation. I need a second by Ms. Doherty. All approved. Thank you. Next, we have a motion by Mr. Hoey, Superintendent, to provide the committee a report in collaboration with public health authorities on how the district is following the Center for Disease Control's recommendations on how to reduce the potential risk of measles transmission in schools and determine what actions to take further to reduce the potential risk of measles transmissions in the school. I need a second by Ms. Doherty. Mr. Hoey?
Thank you, Mayor. And Ms. Durkin, thank you for the motion, because I know I only called Minerva and I was worried about measles outbreaks and where we have a shortage, I believe, in nurses. So I'm just a little concerned and just wanted to get an update on how we sit with this, that's all.
Madam Superintendent?
Thank you. In preparation for this motion, I reached out to the Health Department, our school nurses. They have prepared a report for you. We'll have it for the next meeting. They're just having the Health Department Director review everything. But the good news is that we have 100% compliance with the vaccinations, that unless a student had, an exception. So I will be providing you with that full report next meeting.
So I think it's a good motion, but another question, if, say, measles were to be found in the school system, do we have the process of what steps have to be taken? Yes.
Absolutely. We work very, very closely with the Health Department, who works with state level, and that process would be enacted immediately.
Thank you. All right, next, we have reports of the superintendent. The first is the 2019 summer school programming. Madam Superintendent?
Yes, this report provides you with the summer school programming that is available. The coordinator for special programs, Carolyn Rocheleau, is here if you have any questions or if you wanted to provide a quick update for you. We were pleased that we were awarded additional funding, so it might be helpful for you to hear a little bit about that, if you wish. Ms. Rocheleau?
Good evening. I present a report that details some of the programming we're doing. Fortunately, we've been very aggressive in going after grant funding. All of the summer programming, other than the special education, are funded by grants. So we are now up to 12 schools that have 21st century funding. We're the largest district in the state for funding for 21st century. We'll be applying for 2 new schools in the fall. We're going to be moving forward with the Butler and the STEM Academy as our next 2 schools that we'll apply for. The way that we determine the schools to move forward is based, again, on that equity model, and we look at the poverty as well as the academic levels of the school. So you'll see that most of the schools that get 21st century are schools that either have very high poverty or are in need of assistance. So each of those schools will be offering summer programs. And then this summer, we were able to get some additional grant funding, which is in the next agenda item. I don't want to jump, but we got an additional $80,000 for 4 of those schools who wished to extend their summer program to 6 full weeks. So students at 4 of our schools will get 6 weeks of academics and enrichment to support their summer learning, which is fantastic. We also would do a very robust special education program at 3 different sites. And another new grant we just found out about, is a really great one. It's for early childhood, which we've done in the past, but we haven't done in probably 5 years. We're going to have space for 45 kids at the Lincoln School, a 6-week program, free. All of our summer school programs are free. All kids get breakfast and lunch every day. And the early childhood program is designed for a hybrid model of both students with disabilities, students on IEPs, but may not be qualified for special education summer school. They may have things like speech or an IEP for some not as high need as kids that get special ed summer school. So this will provide them a place to be in the summer, as well as students that are enrolling that have never been to preschool. And are going into our kindergartens and may need some time in the summer to learn how school routines are and to build upon literacy. The model is also really interesting because we're going to be doing work with the families as well and has some home visiting components for those early childhood students. If I could just make one other thing, I know we were speaking about Assistant Superintendent Desmond was talking about the students moving into the Sullivan. One of the things that we've been talking with the principal at the Sullivan is to offer their summer program to those students that will be coming in. So I know that some parents are very are worried about that transition, and that was one thing we thought we would offer to those incoming 5th graders and 6th graders now who may not know the school. They could spend their summer at the school, get to know the building, meet other students, meet our teachers, and help and ease some of that transition. So we'll be working with the staff at the Moody and at the Riley to reach out to families if they're interested in attending the Sullivan summer program.
Ms. Doherty?
Thank you. Through you to Ms. Rochelle. I think that's great news about the summer program. My question is regarding the Idea Camp.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Because I know that was a real loss for us last year, that we didn't have the Idea Camp program. And I just was so excited to see that it's happening again. It's back at UMass.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, and that's a
what
really
that-
important one that left my, so it'll be going on for 3 weeks this summer. We are moving it back. This Idea Camp historically was a UMass Lowell program. This was never, we would work with UMass Lowell to help them identify kids, but UMass Lowell ended up not funding it. And so Lowell Public Schools stepped into that space to offer it. But I think what we lost when we did that is the academic, being on a college campus, being around all that high-tech and engineering and giving kids that experience being in a college. So it took a couple of years, and I have to really say with the persistence from Marty Cohn, who's our science coordinator, to ask UMass Lowell to finally take it back. So UMass Lowell's taken it back, but it is really definitely a partnership between Lowell Public Schools and UMass Lowell. There is a very small fee for families, although anybody that has a need, we will waive that fee. But there is, I think it's I can get back to you with the exact, I think it's $250 for out of.
How many students?
How many students, yes. It is 150 students per week that will be going. Yeah. Yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the 21st century, that was included in the report? Okay. Madam Superintendent?
Yes, so I just would like to publicly thank Ms. Rochelle because she not only is our extended time coordinator, she is our grant person, go-to, and she has been extremely helpful when we haven't had. We know we need, our data is telling us we need to go for this particular grant, but we don't have anyone to write it. And she's been amazing throughout this whole year and in the past as well, but particularly this year, stepping up to do a lot of extra work to make sure that we get those grants. So thank you, Ms. Rochelle.
Thank you. Next, we have fiscal year 19 teacher diversification pilot program grant.
Thank you. Ms. Maggio is going to be our regular on the school committee floor because we're really, it's been exciting with all of the changes and the opportunities. So I'll ask her to give a brief overview of the award that we've received for the diversification pilot program.
Okay, thank you very much. This is truly exciting for me to be able to talk to you about this. We've been granted $174,552 for the Teacher Diversification Pilot Program. When we saw this, we looked at it and said, this was made for Lowell, no question about it. I've been up here talking to you about our paraprofessionals. We talked about having affording the citizens of Lowell to come in and hopefully join our faculty. And honestly, I mean, if you close your eyes and you wanted to write a grant specifically for us, this was it. And we are so grateful to the Department of Education. We got every cent we asked for, and that's wonderful. So what is this grant about, all right? The purpose, and I have this on the sheet there, it's to strengthen and diversify existing teacher recruitment. We've been talking about this for, almost 2 years now. We have a wonderful paraprofessional group of people who are diversified, who are anxious to become teachers. We just needed the dollars really to be able to support them in the way and to get them to meet that goal. And now we have that. And it's just wonderful. Now, what are the priorities? And again, we couldn't have written this any better if we had done it ourselves. Priorities are currently employed paraprofessionals, and again, they've been our focus for at least 2 years. District graduates, which is wonderful because now we're seeking out the citizens of Lowell, right? And during our last one, we had that first session in terms of, do you want to be a teacher in Lowell? And we had a large group, we had 20 people. Dominic was there, thank you for coming. And just a little plug, we have another one tomorrow night at the Butler, 3 to 5, and you're all welcome to attend. But within the group of people that participated, we had at least 3 or 4 district graduates. These are actually there were 3 young ladies who recently graduated from college, live in Lowell, and they've gone through the Lowell school system, and one of them, believe it or not, I had as a 6th grader 10 years ago, and here we are, and they're interested in teaching in Lowell, and they would also be allowed to partake as a candidate for this grant. It just doesn't get any better than this. I just love this. And then also provisionally licensed teachers, and we have some in the system that aspire to be teachers as well. So the grant, basically what we asked for is we wanted to be able to offer our homegrown teachers, if you will, the opportunity to become an ESL teacher in the system. And we've aspired to do this for at least 2 years now. And the fact that it's actually coming to fruition is just, it's incredibly exciting. So there were 2 parts to the proposal that were accepted. The first part is what we put together. We are going to partner with a collaborative. Collaboratives are sanctioned by the department to offer licensure programs that we school districts are not allowed to do. Only colleges that within their degree program. So we're partnered with Collaborative for Educational Services. We've had previous experience with them. They worked with our TESOL program, so we know that they're very reputable and they're very focused and they're very efficient and very successful. So we're going to partner with them, and what we're getting from them is really that license for the plan of study to offer it to our potential candidates. In addition to that, what we also are going to do is we have a budget to purchase Chromebooks, to purchase smart boards, equipment that will enhance. So our paraprofessionals, our teachers are assigned laptops, but our paraprofessionals are not. And now they won't be allowed to keep them because we're going to run this program at least twice. Because the funds are there to do it once this year and another time the following year. So they'll have access to Chromebooks or whatever else that we can purchase that will help them. In addition to that, there's a fee for taking the tests, and we're going to give them prepaid vouchers to do that. Okay, so that's the part A. And while we were writing this grant, I happened to have a call from an individual at UMass Lowell, and she was telling me about a Pathways to Education program, and actually she mentioned the grant, and Mary Ann Bastide and the individuals at UMass Lowell really wanted to be here, and they would be able to give you the specifics, but I can give you the general overview, and again, it's a wonderful opportunity. They're creating a program that's a pathway to education. And an individual at last week's meeting asked the question, information session, what are you doing to encourage our young people, meaning our high school students, to enter the teaching profession? And it was just so wonderful. I was able to say, oh, by the way, this is what we're doing. We're creating a pathway to education. And by that, UMass Lowell and Lowell High School, they're partnering together. They're going to create a curriculum for our students who are racially and diversified. And we're going to provide mentors for them to encourage them to enter the teaching profession, and then that'll be sort of a pathway for them to enter UMass Lowell. So that was the other second part of the grant that was granted to us. So to say this is a win-win situation is an understatement, to be sure. We are so grateful to the Department of Education for choosing us and allowing us to have these funds, and I can rest assured that we're well on our way to spending them, and they'll be well spent. And thank you. Yes. Are there any questions?
I just wanted to thank you and Palache for writing this amazing grant and launching something that has been long what we wanted. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I just want to say there were so many people involved in this that if I stood here, we'd be here till midnight. So it's not about myself and Pilar, but thank you very much. It's about all those wonderful people who helped put it together, and now we're working on the budget. I mean, it's certainly a labor of love, no question about it. Thank you very much.
All right. Next, we have Summer Learning Program Grant Update Award.
Yes, so it's just a quick update. It's a small grant, but $10,755,000 was awarded to our food service program so that they can provide some additional food for our students in summer programming. So that's good news for our students as well.
Questions? Our next Food and Nutrition Summer Program Grant, Madam Superintendent. Oh, we had the summer learning. Did you do the summer learning program? Okay. Food and fiscal 19, fiscal 20 budget priority list.
Yes, this was at the request of the school committee at the last meeting. They asked us to share the priorities that were developed by the school committee during the April 10th, 2019, well, they asked during the April 10th, 2019 school committee meeting, and I'm providing that list to you. In addition, at that same meeting, there was one additional item that was brought forward by Mr. Lay, and that is also included on the list, and that was considered the reinstating parent liaisons. So these are the items that at the end of the 2019 budget that people were hopeful that if additional funding came along, could be reinstated.
Mr. Lay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Superintendent, how about the translation? Would that be something that could be added also? On that day, there were two items. One was the parent liaison, and the other one was the translation.
It would be up to the committee if they wanted to vote to put that on their priority list.
It was an approved motion.
It was approved already.
Yes.
I think it was a motion for us to look
It's not to
into,
vote.
I believe. So I can go back to the meeting notes, but I believe it was a motion to consider additional funding for translation.
The clerk, excuse me, let the clerk,
I could be wrong, so apologize.
yeah, go ahead.
The motion read, Mr. Lay requested that the feasibility of reinstating full-time parent liaisons be added to the priority list that was created during last year's budget proceedings.
My apology, so I'll make sure that it gets on for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
So both the parent liaison and thank you.
You all set, Mr. Lay?
Mr. Lay, that one read that the maker of the motion amended the motion to read as follow. Ask the superintendent create a line item for translations in the FY20 budget for an amount to be determined. So it's not on the priority list.
But it should be a line item in the budget
So,
that then we'll decide to fund.
You all set? Okay. Are we all set, Madam Superintendent? On the priority list? Any further questions? Next, MSBA update.
Yes, I just wanted to provide, I believe I spoke a little bit about it during the budget presentation, but to provide you with an update relative to the Mass Building Authority's Lowell High School project that was approved on April 10th, and you can see the information that was provided to the city manager regarding that, as well as the MSBA Accelerated Repair Program. We had the visit to 6 sites on Wednesday, April 24th, the Bailey, Daly, Greenelge, McAuliffe, STEM Academy, Rogers, at the Rogers and the Sullivan School, and there's some additional information provided to you relative to that. What happened, just as a little update, we did submit additional schools and additional, so there would have potentially have been a roof and a boiler at some of these schools. The MSBA reported to us that they had many more accelerated repair requests this year. So then, instead of denying some people altogether, they readjusted the years on the systems. So this is what Lowell was afforded after, for at least to be considered. So this is the first part of the process, and we were happy to be asked, for them to come out and take a look.
Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, and I did notice that I think they got 80, and last year they only had 60. So for my own clarification, that means that these schools meet the requirements to get the repair funds, but do we have a sense of when they would let us know?
So I believe that if you look at the last 2 pages, it provides a whole timeline. So we need to go through a schematic design within 60 days of being invited in August. So there's a whole timeline that it would be a year out from now. It would not be for the fall.
But the process is taking place.
Right, in August, they would let us know if we're being invited to the next step.
Yes, that's the great news.
Yeah,
Yes.
that would be important to know. Thanks.
But basically, from all information we're getting, we are in the loop. It looks very successful. Okay, thank you. Next, we have report on motions.
Yes, this is just the updated report on motions for your consideration, if you have any questions. And I did, thank you, Ms. Desmond, Mr. Lay's motion is on this for the translation, so it is updated.
Any further questions? Next, we have home education, Madam Superintendent.
Yes, this is just a request from parents to homeschool their child.
Any motion to approve? By Ms. Doherty, second by Mr. Lay. Roll call.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Mr. Nutter?
Yes.
Mayor Samaras? Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
Thank you. Next, we have enrollment figures, Madam Superintendent.
If there are any questions that people have, we just finished up our enrollment for pre-K and K. We'll have the lottery on May 13th, I believe, and so that was quite successful in joining the pre-K and the K all together at once.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes, through you, Mayor, to Superintendent. On this budget proposal overview on page 8, we have, at the top of it there, it says enrollment, 16,184 children for,
That's from the state.
yeah, but I'm wondering what our numbers are right now. Are they,
Those are the numbers provided by the state on the Department of Ed's website, and they do include the charter school students.
Yes.
okay.
All set, Mr. Hoey?
All set, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I need a motion to accept the report of the superintendent of 7-1 through 7-8 and 7-10 as a report of progress. By Ms. Martin, second by Mr. Dakota. All in favor? Thank you. Next, we have, I need a motion to approve the Fitchburg State University research proposal. I need a motion to accept by Ms. Doherty, second by Mr. Dakota.
I'm Dr. Nichols. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions? Thank you. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Mr. Nutter? Mayor Samaras?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Next, I need a motion to approve the Walden University research proposal. Need a motion to accept by Mr. Hoey, second by Mr. Dakota. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Mr. Nutter? Mayor Samaras? Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Next, I need a motion to approve the budget transfer of $30,828.65. Motion by Ms. Doherty, second by Mr. Dakota. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Mr. Nutter? Mayor Samaras?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
All right, next, I need a motion to take approval of both convention and conference requests together by Ms. Doherty, seconded by Mr. Dakota. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Mr. Nutter? Mayor Samaras?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Next, we have a thank you card from the family of Donald J. McQueen for the moment of silence. I need a motion to accept and place on file by Mr. Dakota, second by Ms. Martin. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Next, I'd like to have a motion to approve all 7 UTL sick leave requests together by Ms. Doherty, second by Mr. Hoey. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Lay?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Mr. Nutter? Mayor Samaras?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Hoey, second by Mr. Dakota. Thank you.